Welcome to the Wellness at Work podcast, brought to you by the Learning and Development Projects at Silberman School of Social Work, Hunter College. This is a series of conversations designed to inspire wellness in helping professionals. Our conversations will focus on understanding the importance of self-care, reducing trauma, and bringing to listeners new ideas and practices that promote wellness at work and in your professional life. Welcome to our show today.
So we're back and we're focusing on several aspects of a conversation that Victoria, Ferguson-Young, and I have had. I'm so glad that we're here today to be able to talk about parts of a conversation that were in a previous episode. And I think today what we're going to be doing is to sort of drill down a little bit about a couple of topics surrounding aging, ageism. Interestingly enough, we're going to also be talking about the cultural perceptions of aging. And there's also some discussion about the impact of GLP-1s on aging and how we think it's may be turning our society into a different direction. So, Victoria, welcome again. I'm so happy that you were able to come for another discussion or another talk.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. So looking forward to our discussion today.
The interesting thing are the cultural perceptions of aging. And so one of the things that was kind of how we met I think it was a year ago, we were at Tamkin. And
earlier this year.
Was it? Oh my gosh.
It was February.
Oh, it was February. Well, yeah. So it's also, maybe we should be talking about how time passes for older people in stranger ways. I can testify personally. But this year about, we were sitting together, we'd been introduced to each other, and then we, towards the end of the conference, they had a little sort of small group activity discussing what possible changes or what possible, I don't know what you say, evolutions you could think about for nursing homes. And you and I had a sort of we're sitting at a table by ourselves, and we sort of said, okay, well, here's what we think. And we sort of said, basically, that the industry really needs significant change. I won't go into how significant we actually said, but I guess what taking away from that conversation, what I'm thinking about is there are perceptions in the media and culture about aging that are changing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about those perceptions that are shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we know is that we're seeing a shift from a conversation on ageism and aging that was at one time very academic centered or only in gerontology or something that pertained to nursing homes or just a very medically based focus, right? Like it was, had to do with just sickness or, or surrounding medical care. But what we know now is that aging is a much more comprehensive, aspect to explore, and that it's based in so much more than only one's medical, situation, but also their environment, their socioeconomic status, all these other factors. We're seeing just more organizations, movements surrounding aging in place. Our work at NCALL is really about educating communities on abuse in later life. So it's coming outside of, I think it's shifting from being a very a small group kind of discussion more so in certain spaces to now it is expanding to to more people and to more communities and to really bring about more practical ways to assist older adults. So we've seen that with even legislation that has been passed in the past 10, 20 years, Elder Justice Act, Older Americans Act, things that are there's been more policy, and not that we are where we need to be. I'm not suggesting that, but we're seeing more of a shift in that this is not something that's as abstract. It's like, aging really requires, much more. It's much more than just what's going on between an older adult and their doctor.
Right.
But it's about their environment. It's about their socioeconomic status, their social connections, just their access to fresh, healthy food and feeling safe in their home. So there's so many other factors that contribute to one's aging. And so, we're starting, in some ways we're seeing more, we're not seeing enough, but we're seeing more representation in older adults, but there's still there's still so much more that has to happen that needs to take place.
The last part of it, I just want to, if you could expand a little bit. I mean, I'm thinking about when you said that, what popped into my mind is one, it's a much more complex.
Yes.
Yes, really sort of unfold. The other part about it is the idea of the intersection, or borrowing from a little bit from the idea of intersectionality. I think. What are your thoughts about that? Because I think when traditionally, you're right, we've been educated around aging in a very narrow way, in a very narrow perspective. And now what we have is a broader, but a much bigger landscape to cover.
Yes. And, I think what is happening is that the fact that even ageism is considered, is starting to be considered more of an ism and more of a true problem, and not just, something that is innocuous and harmless.
Right.
We're seeing that, aging, and these are social justice issues, right? They're not individual problems, but they are issues of social justice that, in order to improve the livelihoods and the health span, not only lifespan, how long someone lives, but the health span, how healthy someone's life is, their quality of life, requires the whole society to support that, right? So that, I think, that piece is really important to highlight here, that it's not just, again, a personal or medical thing. It's not just this one-sided or very narrow thing, but it really is, something that's a much broader issue that, more policies will be needed to help to improve the lives of older adults, so that, there's more access to better healthcare and medical care, that, there's more access to fresh and healthy foods. I mean, and things that contribute, and even, that families get more support surrounding for older adults who have more complex care needs. That, there's much more community support. There's even more opportunities for older adults to be engaged in community. For those who, oftentimes when people aren't stop working due to retirement, they lose a lot of that social connection. And so we're seeing more ways for older adults to be engaged in that way. We're seeing more older adults going back to school, starting new careers later in life, right? Getting doctorates in their 70s. Like these are like advancements there, but there's still so much that has to, there's still so much work that needs to happen there. I think abuse in later life and elder abuse is still more taboo than it should be. It should be something that we all recognize and know about, and are working to solve and to stop. But it's still something that people don't think is a problem. Don't think is a problem, or that older adults are experiencing abuse or violence. So there's still work to do, but there's been a big shift in recognizing that this is a true community effort that takes a macro level society, social justice initiatives, not just individual personal type of things to try to fix.
So what are the less recognizable but still significantly impactful kinds of abuse that you think are not so much under recognized? I don't want to talk about reporting because that's a whole other issue. But what are the kinds of, are there kinds of abuse that are much more, for lack of a better term, acceptable? Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yes, or what is maybe considered abuse? Like, that's abuse. If this if there's bruises and black eyes, that's abuse.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, to answer that, what I'm thinking is that, and and for all individuals, but typically, if you were to ask, someone who's not well versed in that, the thought is yes, if there's physical injury, then that is abuse.
Right.
People still don't necessarily think, that emotional abuse, psychological abuse are
Right.
types of abuse, stalking as well.
Right.
30% of older adults are experiencing stalking,
Right.
and may not be able to name it or call it that, but know that someone is watching their move, is showing up where they're not supposed to be, things of that nature. Sexual assault, I think, is probably going to be the most taboo, that older adults are victims of sexual
Yeah.
assault. Again, there's still a common notion that sexual abuse or rape is about sex or pleasure, but it's about power and control. And so, people don't think that that would be something that would happen to an older adult. I think also the fact that family members are more likely to be the perpetrators against older adults too. That's something that is not commonly thought. We typically think of it's stranger scams. It's, people from outside of one's home that they don't know well who are trying to take advantage of. And it is that. But
Mhm.
much more commonly, older adults are experiencing abuse at the hands of a trusted person that they know.
Right.
Be it a intimate partner, spouse, adult child, adult grandchild, neighbor, friend, but people who they have a trust-based relationship with.
So sexual abuse is underrecognized. Is it because we don't really think of older people having sexual lives?
Absolutely. Because again, I think the thought is with rape, with sexual assault, period, that it's more so about pleasure and not
Right.
about sex, but it is about power and control. And
Right.
so, yes, that thought of we don't think of older adults as being sexual beings anymore. So, it's not thought of as this is a problem that older adults are experiencing. But unfortunately, it very much is. But it's even more so underreported. And due to ageism, to kind of go back to that for a second,
Right.
our data and our information on the occurrences of abuse is not as profound as those as younger individuals, because we know it's so underreported, right? There has not been the same amount of study funded research on older adults as it has for younger individuals. And so we know that what we do know is that 1 in every 24 cases of elder abuse come to light. And
Mhm.
so we're not getting a full reporting on all the abuse that older adults are experiencing as well. So, I mean, this has repercussions from the individual micro level to even how, on the macro level, what's focused on in research, who's important, politically, who's getting recognized as victims, where do we need to fund
Mhm.
that, what policies are created to support older adults, victim services for older adults. It's not, we don't see that as there really being a need, because they're not likely aren't victims, or we serve everybody, so they can just they get served with everybody else, but there's not a thought process of the nuance or specialized needs that they may have service as well.
So yeah, you know what? In a moment, I think I want to touch on that to talk
Okay.
about the differences in terms of culture,
Yeah.
and how, I guess, for how I'm thinking about it is if you are not aware or curious or open to understanding difference, there
Mhm.
is so much that's lost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is absolutely critical with service providers, in thinking about how aging in different cultures shows up. Well, for the most vulnerable of our communities,
Right.
who are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, if you have been a part of a most vulnerable group, or you are experiencing multiple layers of discrimination or oppression, or you've lived in poverty, you have, maybe you're part of a marginalized group, to have decades of compound oppression and discrimination or disadvantage, and now to be an older age, that really does it sets people up to be in positions where their health span is not what it would be for those who are
Mhm.
from more affluent or majority communities.
Mhm.
And so that compounds. So things from redlining to segregated housing to employment discrimination, to unequal education
Mm.
access, to just healthcare inequalities. all of those things now for baby boomers and those from the silent generation who are in older age, that discrimination has compounded. And so that really sets
Mm,
up the biggest cultural differences than
mm,
from communities who the status quo, who has higher net worth and income, who's had access and been a part and been able to live in
mm.
safer communities with more access, with more fresh, nutritious food, with better transportation options. All of these things compound to make a significant difference in one's older life,
Mm.
and regarding their health span and their lifespan, of course. And so that again comes back to the social justice issue, right? We are
Yeah.
the environment and the opportunities are shaping one's life in older age. So though people, often may think, oh, if you're older, like you just need to work out and eat healthy and you'll be okay. But that is not encompassing just the entire, what is needed for a healthy lifestyle with social connections, with neighborhood safety and secure and stable housing, and just the financial resources and stability that's needed
Yeah.
for a healthy, long lifespan and health span. So all of that has to be considered. It's not, again, not personal. It is really a much bigger issue, and it's reflective what we see with older adults. And so many who are most vulnerable, who are struggling, is reflective of how our society is not set up for them to be, to be in the best place.
Right. Embrace the complexity. So, Victoria, I want to talk more about perceptions around aging, particularly cultural. And I think if we can steer the conversation to talk about the how in different cultures, financial exploitation and abuse, how does it manifest and how does it manifest differently? And I think because what we were just talking about, we were talking about how to embrace the complexity, but we also sort of have to I think there's also a respect thing that needs to sort of go on there in terms of, I like the way I call it a respect thing rather than just respect. But it really is something where how do you, in your experience,
Mhm.
talk about the nuance?
Yeah, so, some things that we see that are different with older adults who have a higher net worth, that have maybe significant retirement savings. Well, first, let me preface it by saying that financial exploitation occurs across, regardless of socioeconomic status, right? It can happen to any and everyone in as an older adult. So it's not like there are some groups that aren't experiencing financial
Mhm.
exploitation, and there are some who are, and like, so it does not discriminate in that way. But yes, there are multiple ways in which it can take place. So what we do know is that when older adults who have a higher net worth, who maybe have just uh, who have more retirement savings or things of that nature, they can experience their accounts being mismanaged or even being accessed without their permission by their loved ones who maybe have access to them. Right.
Mhm.
So, and I mean, that can happen with those who maybe don't have such a high net worth, but when there are individuals who, I mean, what we see a lot of times is when there are adult children who aren't working for whatever reason or don't want to work, but they know that their parents or grandparents have, have savings, have money that they can access, or a large sum of it. There can be, just exploitation can occur in that way. Like, how can they
Mhm.
access it without their permission, or how can they, maybe use more than they were supposed to, or often think they don't really need it. They're old, they're going to die anyway, and so we see that type of exploitation happening. We also see from those who are outside, who are not family members, but when there are, sweetheart scams, obituary scams, so various type of scams that people will, look into when the obituary one, which is popular, is people will read obituaries in the newspaper and contact someone, find their contact information, and say that they're their grandson Jason, who they'll find out enough information through an obituary to be able to make up a story that they need money or can
Right.
send them gift cards. So those kinds of things are happening as well. For those who may not have the income or have retirement savings or have savings that someone could access, they may receive they may receive government benefits. They may receive, there is benefits trafficking that can happen. There is, exploitation of benefits if someone is, receiving SNAP benefits or even just other type of other benefits, Social Security, other benefits from the government. There's exploitation that can take place in that way to try to access it, to intercept checks or to intercept whatever those benefits may be, as well. Still financial exploitation, different methods of how it can manifest. But again, it's not something that discriminates in regards to it's not happening. It is, but unfortunately, people become more and more clever as to how they can access or try to gain trust of someone to get access to it, or create stories to try to guilt trip older adults into giving money. We hear stories of people who will even befriend older adults or widows and say that they've and develop a relationship with them, and then suddenly they have a made up crisis and they need $20,000, and they have pull on their heartstrings and they'll send it, and then they never hear from them again. Right. So, I mean, these are some of the ways that it's happening. We are also trying to connect with more financial institutions to address this, so that more banks and those doing even wealth management are aware of, not that they're not aware, but just even working with older adults in particular, right? And so from having the interpersonal conversations that take place to knowing how to connect them with local resources that they need for safety planning and even prevention with their surrounding their finances. But what we also know is that more than younger individuals, older adults are specifically targeted. Financial exploitation and neglect are much more prevalent with older adult victims of violence than with younger individuals. So yes, there's a lot of predators who are specifically targeting older adults in particular. And because many have worked for decades, have acquired, their savings or retirement income, many older adults, they can be targeted specifically for that.
So this is very helpful. So financial exploitation is a form of trauma.
Absolutely.
And can you talk a little bit about what kinds of traumatic impacts can result from somebody who's been financially exploited?
Yeah, because, and it's always devastating, of course, but for those older adults who maybe have complex care needs, they may be no longer able to work. If your savings is drained from you, you don't have the ability to just go back to work or to start a new career. As a younger individual is way more likely to do so if they fall on, if they lose their savings due to exploitation. Right. And so that is a huge, it's even, and then that impacts housing stability, right? And just the challenges with finding safe, secure housing, with housing costs on the rise. It's even, and just the trauma of having lost, maybe your entire life savings, and now you lose your home where I've lived here for 30, 40, 50 years. It's magnified in a way that makes it so much more difficult to move forward.
So talk a little bit about the psychological aspect of the psychological trauma that can result from financial exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what along the lines of what I was just saying is that the immense challenge and the trauma of how do you rebuild, when you have so many decades of life and work experience, if your finances are drained, if you've now lost that. The ability, and not that it can't happen, but the immense difficulty in psychologically having to start over at 70,
Recover.
75, right?
Hmm.
Especially if there are complex care needs or health challenges that that person is experiencing. We also know that in older life, unfortunately, people, lose their social circles, become smaller due to not working, also due to people passing away or moving away or changes in their health. And
Hmm.
so having the network of support is often not the same too. And so, it then, operating out of a place and space of trauma can lead to just in more higher levels of loneliness, which, that loss of social connection really can contribute to one's decline health wise,
Hmm.
and just ability to function and operate as they normally did. So the repercussions and the fallout is often just much more severe because, and psychologically, because there's a lifetime of work, of savings, to get to this point of having a home wherever that may be, of all that you have accomplished, and to have someone drain that or take that from you,
Hmm.
is magnified and it can be much more intense than younger individuals and younger people.
And how does shame factor into this?
Oh, shame is so huge. And I'm glad you said that because people often think, especially with the scams that are, I think, we hear about that more with the scams from strangers. So the sweetheart scams, obituary scams, like, how could I be so stupid that I did this? Like, how could I fall for that? How could I not see that this was happening? And that is also a challenge in moving past it and moving forward because they just, this obviously the loss of what you have lost, but then just feeling like, how could I, if you're an
Hmm.
accomplished professional who's done whatever you have or however long you've worked or you've raised a family, but then you've lost everything due
Hmm.
to a scam, that those implications and, just psychologically getting past that is so huge. And then the trauma can lead to increases in depression and again, the isolation and loneliness as well. People feel shame. They oftentimes don't want to come out and be in community.
Yeah.
They don't want to come out and go places. There could be embarrassment that comes. And so again, these things compound.
Hmm.
Whereas, it's not just operating as one, but then there's so many factors that are at play here. And it can just be a lot more difficult to make friends and to build community in
Right.
older age. So,
And trust.
yes,
And
of course, and trust.
yeah.
Absolutely. It's much
And
more.
and so I wonder, so I wonder if when you have trust that's seriously compromised,
Mhm.
it's not just limited to money or resources. It's kind of broader in a sense.
Oh,
I don't trust
yes.
any
And
system
it
to
it
help.
absolutely, yes, it absolutely impacts, I can't trust going to an agency for assistance or I can't
Right.
trust, whomever. And then this becomes again can contribute to a lack of connection, lack of, assistance and help that's needed because you don't trust, because the trust is gone. And to be
Right.
able to build that, to be able to trust again,
Hmm.
is just a way that the trauma can manifest, like in not being able to or having difficulty is a way that the trauma can manifest. So yes, you're absolutely right in that it is so it can be so difficult to and we see that with, when we do trainings for advocates and thinking of, just some of the internal barriers that older adults are experiencing.
Hmm.
And, if there's been a previous situation in which, seeking help resulted in a negative consequence or, in another loss of some way,
Hmm.
I'm not, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going
Right.
to reach out for that, or I'm not going to
Right.
tell someone, or I'm
Right.
not going to tell friends or family because they took advantage of that. So yes, absolutely, it's going to be a domino effect that ultimately, and for good reason, of course, if your trust has been broken, you do want to protect yourself. That's a protection strategy. But it often then results in, just that lack of getting the assistance or help that's needed to be able to move forward.
Right. Yeah. Does this manifest differently for men versus women? And I apologize for it's it's no longer binary men versus women, but I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, broadly speaking, um, does this kind of trauma manifest differently? Have you noticed?
Well, we hear about in that we've noticed is that yes, with male victims, it can be more difficult to, to disclose that you have,
Mm,
experienced been exploited, that you're, or that, someone got you in some way. It can be more
mhm.
difficult to admit that there can be, even more, I think socially, there's more of an acceptance
Mm,
with older women who are victims, and so that absolutely, there can be, it can be easier sometimes for women to share and to disclose the violence that they've experienced. Um,
right.
and with older male victims, it can be a lot more challenging, due to just societal beliefs on stoicism. You're supposed to hold it together.
Yeah,
Nobody
yeah,
can break you. You're a strong man. You're the, in some households, you're the head of the household. And,
yeah,
this to be shocked that now, I mean, of course, this can go between both genders, and all genders.
yeah. No, yeah,
It's
I get
not,
that.
it's, more of a generalization, but yes, it can absolutely be, just more difficult to
Mhm.
to navigate and to handle that trauma with male victims if they're, again, because financially we know that men are often considered breadwinners or have acquired more income than women, are higher wage earners, and so
Mm.
to have a loss, psychologically can feel like more of a I think that it's all traumatic, but yes, I think, for men who feel as though it never happens to them, they can't be victims.
Right.
I can absolutely imagine that it could be much more, it can be.
It sort of it counters the idea that men are strong and sort of probably to some extent um, challenges their perception of their how they see themselves. I didn't want to say the masculinity because it's not always about but it does. It's interesting. It's very interesting. And so when you're if you could just talk really quickly about when you're training, and I guess I'm sort of really fascinated by the concept of shame. I'm really interested. How do you, is there one, can you give us like one way that um, you guide people to be able to, frontline service providers I'm usually talking about, or advocates, to engage people who are experiencing shame as a result of abuse?
Yes. I mean, we train consistently on the, trauma-informed approach and survivor-centered approach, so that there is a deeper understanding of how trauma can present and show up. That, in shame as well, which, can be a manifestation of trauma.
Hmm.
And that really what trauma is, that trauma is the response to, an incident, a situation, an occurrence, that severely harm someone. And that what, the trauma is the outcome of that.
Right.
And so, we train extensively on that so that service providers are aware of what to expect, that, if in understanding the time that it may take for, I think especially with older adults, to even share that they've experienced, abuse. We just talked about how difficult can be to talk about it, and
Hmm.
for older adults at this time, again, baby boomers and the silent generation who you didn't talk about what happened in your
No.
house to people. You just don't do it. So it may
Hmm.
take 3, 4, 5, conversations before someone discloses, maybe fully about what they've experienced. And so those type of just strategies, if you will, and approaches have to be very carefully considered, that there is additional time often in working with older adults, that there's an awareness about even historical trauma that, older adults have experienced. Again, we talked about discrimination over the lifetime, from those from Native or, indigenous communities, what they've
Hmm.
experienced, how they can show up for other immigrants as well, those who maybe have limited English proficiency, just how trauma that they have experienced can show up. But as a service provider, it's important to be aware that even how you set up your environment for a conversation. There's multiple aspects surrounding trauma informed approach and also survivor centered that you find out what that person wants. It's not, I think oftentimes it's this, this is what you do, this is the process, and there has to be tailored responses, the opportunity to let a survivor share what they need, and that they're the expert in their life. And so these are all examples of how to really consider, when someone is coming back to shame,
Mhm.
creating the space and environment to try to build trust and rapport, let them take the time that they need, understand that they may need additional time, letting them know that, how much they want to share or not share is okay, that you can provide them with options of what they'd like to do safety planning with them, to help to build their sense of agency and, surrounding what they want to have happen next. These are all strategies that help to really, again, center that survivor so that, they can take steps, toward progress and to be in a healthier and more safe space and place.
Victoria, so let's shift a bit and talk about GLP-1s and extended life. I guess let's start generally in terms of the fact that GLP-1s have the ability to reduce healthcare risk and optimize the ability of some folks to be able to live a little bit longer. Um, and one of the things I think about, and this is my own, I have no data to support this, so maybe we should mute this part, is the idea that older people are going to stay around longer. It's possible for older people to stay around longer in a healthier way.
Mhm.
And for those older people who are in positions of where power or where they have leverage, there's already a sort of a sense of tension generationally between people who are behind them, millennials, Gen Xers, etc. And I wonder, my wonder is it are, and this is just my own thing, so I don't need to comment, and you could just say this is some old guy sort of weirdly going about something. But I guess I wonder whether or not that's gonna open the door a little bit wider to ageism and make it a little bit more normal because you're gonna have older people who are gonna still be around longer than maybe we should be thinking about their retirement dates or whatever. That's a sort of digression, but I think generally speaking, if we could start talking, what are your perceptions in terms of aging and GLP-1s?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that I think it's a likely reality that as these medications are becoming more widespread, at one point there was a lot in the news about the fact that they were so expensive and that there are people who could not access them. That's another issue. But I know that there have been many are now like available in pill form, which is a much lower cost. There's some government subsidies making some $50. So the access is increasing. So yes, there's very likely that more will continue, will take it, which could impact longevity. I think, things I've been reading I don't think we don't know conclusively, but it's very likely, right, that longevity can, increase, and GLP-1s would impact that. So absolutely, we could see there being more of an attack, if you will, on older adults. It also raises for those who, I also think about with more longevity requires more resources, right? So thinking about financial stability as people get older, if you outlive your retirement funds or if you, start, but we also see sometimes with older adults, with those who are of limited means, lifespan and health span is not what it is for those who have more affluence. But we are seeing in Congress, there's, yes, as you mentioned, lots of tension surrounding older adults who are still serving. And I firmly believe that's, rooted more so in ageism, and that they've then more than the fact that just their
They're
age.
just old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like because
Yeah.
it's just too old. They're just too old. They don't know this. They don't know that. Well, there are younger individuals who don't know things, but you learn, right? So there's no reason why an older adult can't learn more about AI as younger individuals or children learn, right? So we can all still learn. We're never at a point where we can't learn anything. So yes, I think it can open up, it can absolutely open up more of a focus in older adults. Also think about, the impact in the great transfer of wealth that is, being reported and talked about with baby boomers in particular passing on or passing away or passing their, net savings and all to their children and millennials and Gen Z, and the significance of that too. So there's multiple
Yeah.
implications
Yeah.
if that doesn't happen as companies and wealth management firms and all and banks are preparing for,
Right.
that's another impact. So yes, there could be a huge impact across the board. Also, what does that mean for our care systems? If people are living longer, um, like even with GLP-1s, I think I think you also have to look at comprehensive health with that too. And, we talked about many other factors that contribute to health span, but if you do have to live in assisted living for a longer time, or you want to, just there being a creation of more housing for older adults. And so, I mean, the impact is significant and is
Mhm.
something that, we must really think about, plan for, in a way where we are preparing and accommodating and older adults and not seeing this as a problem. I think it's like oftentimes older adults are seen as a problem. Why don't they just go away? That's communicated over and over, in a way that, we don't typically see with younger individuals. There's much more of appreciation
Mhm.
for their newness than for older adults.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it's interesting to think about, like, what will this mean in another 20 years? If we see huge trends in people's lifestyle. We also know GLP-1s don't work for everyone too, though. That's another
Right.
point. Some people, it does not work, they can't take it. But there's a lot of exciting research coming out about how they could potentially help with addressing dementia, addiction issues. We know about the metabolic diseases. So there's a lot of potential to really impact lifespan and health span. And so it's very interesting to think about and really compelling to think about just what these impacts will be and how, and how we as a society will adjust to them. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And what the other thing I was thinking is that if these things, oh gosh, I hope this is not the beginning of like a sci-fi movie where suddenly you realize that GLP-1s are the devil. But assuming that that's not the case, one of the things I think that's interesting about what you're saying is essentially that our understanding of social determinants of health are going to change.
yes,
That thinking about that alone is like,
yes,
oh
yes.
wow.
And the
Um,
ethics behind that.
yeah.
Who gets
Yeah.
access, who's getting left behind? Are we
Yeah.
extending life for everyone? Like there's so much to think about in that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of on the I kind of think it's on the level of the introduction of AI, uh,
Mm, mm,
in terms of how we how we under how we understand the impact. Well, it's not the impact. How we understand what's possible in
Mhm.
terms of healthcare. It's sort of
Right.
just, assuming that these effects last and that
Mhm.
there's no significant number of side effects.
Right.
And as as you pointed out, there are some people who, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know,
Mhm.
um, GLP-1s don't have the effect on them.
Right.
It's part of this discussion is sort of the result of me. There was a February issue of the New Yorker, which
Mhm.
is going to be in the show notes. There's a link in the show notes, in which it was a very extensive article about the impacts of particularly, I think it was Ozempic,
Mhm.
and it was really just really fascinating to read. And you change somebody's trajectory, particularly if you think about somebody who's like 55, 60 years old,
Mhm.
and they gained weight, as a lot of people when they get older do.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not even talking about people who are obese. I'm obese, or I'm not even talking about people who have diabetes.
Mhm.
Just being able to sort of check that weight loss, that weight gain, and sort of, it's almost like you're moving the clock back a little.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it can definitely mean that. And I think, it's also then important to think about, I'm thinking about just like the holistic well-being of that person,
Hmm.
right? So in
Hmm.
living longer, what does that mean for your access to healthcare? Does that mean you're now maybe able to work longer if you're not financially secure? Like it's really interesting to think about what that means, but I think we have to just also recognize in how healthy aging, longevity, health span, depends on many factors that but how GLP-1s could impact that. I'm still curious about, it's like to see, does that mean if people have more energy are able to work out more? Will they do it? Too. It's like just social, psychologically, if I've lost
Well,
the weight, do I still need to, does that mean I'm now eating healthy and nutritious food? Like what because even still, if GLP-1s are the only factor, um, does that mean that they alone will increase, or is it because of the GLP-1 that, again, maybe someone can work longer and so increase their financial security? Does it mean that they will,
yeah.
have better access to healthcare? What is it? What are the what will the implications be? So I think right now I seem to have more questions about,
Yeah. Well,
just
no, it's too
what
early to
will
really have
they?
answers. I think if you were starting to
Yeah,
spout answers, people would be like, okay, who are these two? But
yeah.
one of the things that does happen is it has an impact on your relationships.
Mm,
So, yeah, and particularly if you're in a partnered relationship or marriage
mhm,
and one of you has experienced significant weight loss,
mhm.
and sometimes it's weight loss and then there's more sexual appetite, and sometimes there's less sexual,
Okay.
but it's so I guess it's like AI, you just don't know the extent of
Yes.
what's going to
What
happen
will
to.
this
And
mean?
it's
Yes.
like to sort of speculate. This is part of the conversation, but it's interesting to sort of think about because as you think about people who serve older people, particularly older people who are being abused,
Mhm,
it makes engagement, makes you how you contemplate engagement, contemplate who's in front of you, because we
mhm,
sort of tend to believe we know based on what we see and some information, right? And
mhm,
now throw this in, and this could be where, how when people say, oh, you look younger. Well,
mhm.
it is possible that this is a manifestation of something. The other thing I think also is there is this ability to address things like morbid obesity that's fairly significant. And the reason why I think about it is that it affects our society disproportionately to any other society.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it is fascinating to think about. And again, I also think about, I'm thinking about the access piece because if
Mhm.
access does not continue to increase, or what if it becomes restricted again, or what if the prices go up? What does that mean, right? So the powers that be, how it is regulated or not, there's still so many factors to consider. And so, I mean, I'm in a position of thinking it's very exciting for those who are in need, who especially have health conditions and health issues that nothing else has worked for, more than just weight loss. But, I think also the weight loss, our society has a fixation on thinness. And
Yeah,
so,
that's yeah,
everyone who's in a larger body is not necessarily unhealthy. But,
yes,
this thought of if you don't have metabolic disease, but you are at a higher weight, then, should you take it? What is that?
yeah,
There's so much to tease apart
yeah.
here.
That's a really and culturally, and then think about people. Yeah, there's a sameness, and it's really interesting. I don't know if in the New York Times this week, at least I'm remembering this week. Um, there was in this fashion section, there was a article where the writer was talking about and I don't remember which fashion designer, but it was a fashion designer who was sort of turning their back on extreme thinness, but they talked
Right.
about it was not a Ozempic style, which is kind of
Mm,
interesting.
mm,
Um,
mhm.
and what I also heard when you were talking about the fact that not everybody, that thin isn't the thing, is we've been talking about so many things about culture, but we also been talking about how there are other people, other, no, sorry, what I meant is that people from different cultures have different standards of beauty.
That's true. Yes,
And we
absolutely.
need to be able,
Absolutely.
or different standings of health. Let's
Mhm.
actually not talk about beauty. And what I think is important about what you were saying and what you said today is to really sort of understand the complexity and to apply that complexity even to something like this to say not everybody needs to lose 40 pounds, not everybody needs to be really thin.
Right.
I think
And
that's that's a
yeah,
significant thing.
absolutely. And I think that what this brings about is how important, as we talk about AI, to think critically about, about these advancements. They are exciting. There's a lot they can do, but what are the implications? Who can access this? Who's most affected? How do we respond as a society if there is a dramatic shift in
Mm,
in lifestyle, and what does that mean? What does that look like? Will there be, age discrimination will but maybe increase if more older adults have to work longer, and workplace discrimination? There's so much to think about, but I think that, as I know we got to close out, it's so important that we are thinking critically about it,
yeah.
that we are asking these questions, we are wrestling with this, we are really thinking about what the implications are, who's impacted, and how we can, best support, as with even the outside of this advancement, other advancements, people are living longer, life expectancy is increasing. So how can our systems really support, older adults, so that lifespan, how can our society, coming back to that piece, really be a space of equity and justice, where people can live and age with dignity and the freedom that they need, to live their best lives.
Yeah, that's a perfect place for us to stop. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Always.
Yeah,
Thank you. Look forward to the next time.
that's exactly what I was, my thoughts.